Hi, I'm Kent.
And I'm Anna.
And this is Film and Family, a podcast about feature filmmaking for professionals in the film industry with families. Hit subscribe to never miss an episode.
Let's jump right in. Today, we want to talk about what leadership and parenting have in common. These are topics we've both been thinking a lot about, would like to have a conversation about, and share some of the things we've each been learning, some of which we have not talked to each other about yet. So you'll get to hear it for the first time.
Whereas if we had talked about it, you'd be hearing it for the first time.
Well, yeah, it's probably better that we save some conversations for the podcast.
Yeah, well, but we have discussed a lot of it just offhand, but yeah, I don't know everything that you're going to ask me. That is often the case in the podcasts. Well, this is something I think we've wanted to record in a podcast for a while. We might even start creating some coursework around this subject in terms of leadership for parents. I don't know why we don't think of it that way. But I've studied leadership books, not enough. And I've studied parenting books, not enough. I've got lots of books to read left in my life. And I really do feel like they teach a lot of the same things. And it's so easy to compartmentalize these principles that you're learning. But I've often thought the clear, concise communication required to parent a child that seems completely illogical is the same clarity and conciseness required to lead a team or direct a movie or write a screenplay. Like, you need clarity, you need communication, you need respectful culture to be able to successfully do these things. So really, those are all just principles of leadership among other principles. But I just have found that there's so much bleed over. And I think that's why we've both felt this would behoove us and our listeners and our members.
Yeah, there's definitely crossover. And basically, they both are about influencing other people who are within our stewardship, whether you're a department head, a director, a parent. I think most of you are leaders in some way, in some capacity, even just among your peers. And so
I would argue that all human beings in some capacity are leaders.
I definitely believe that. And so leadership is a valuable skill to learn, but especially if you're going to lead a team making a creative endeavor, that is something that separates film from other arts, is that it's a huge team effort. It's not something you can go do by yourself in a room and present later. It requires a lot of people working together, communicating together, and can't be done in a vacuum.
Yeah, unless
I guess
you're
a vlogger could be done in a vacuum,
or a stay-at-home Lego stop motion artist, which there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I shouldn't say it can't. But it isn't usually.
Usually there's some collaboration that exists. So what do you think leadership is, Anna?
Well, I've been trying to define this, so I actually Googled it this morning. And I was reading quotes about leadership.
Pinteresty looking quotes.
Yes, I'm pulling them up now. There were some of these quotes that I disagree with, and I kind of want to start with those because I actually feel like I believed this before I made this feature film. And even while we were making this last feature film, I think I believed that this is what a leader was, and I don't believe it anymore. Or at least I think there's a lot more to it.
I'm really curious now.
So here's one of the quotes. It says, leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. Sounds pretty good. I think to some degree that's true, but it has nothing to do with people. And I really think that leadership is about people. You're leading people. And so having a vision and translating it into reality is something you could do by yourself, or you could do with a group, and you could do it as a terrible leader, or you could do it well.
Yeah. I mean, some would argue that Hitler was a really good leader. And even people who disagree with what Hitler did and how he did it might still say, well, yeah, but he was a really good leader. I guess in my mind, the word leadership would not include what Hitler did, frankly. I mean, and other people who are dictators, forceful leaders, people who lead through fear. I don't think that's true leadership. I think that's what you're saying. Yeah, that does technically kind of bring about a vision and bring it into reality, but is that truly leading? You know, scaring a bunch of people. And I mean, to some degree, there are things you can learn from him, I suppose. But yeah, is that really true leadership? It doesn't last. It didn't work. It failed ultimately, as most of these sort of false pseudo leaders, their stuff might have this smoke and mirrors, sort of a flash in the pan effect, but it won't really sustain.
Yeah. Here's another one that I somewhat disagree with now, and I'll explain why. This one says the secret of leadership is simple. Do what you believe in, paint a picture of the future, go there, people will follow. So, yeah, sometimes people will follow. And I do think that that can be a powerful aspect of leadership, to create things, to have a vision,
To pioneer.
to pioneer. Exactly. I think that's a huge part of being a leader, but I don't think it makes you a good leader just that you do that.
Yeah,
I
you
think,
could, like before, it's like you could lead someone to anywhere or anything. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
And also, I think back to even the podcast we did, our first impressions on our first feature film. And I remember saying, and I kind of repent of this now, but saying that I felt like my job as a director was to hold on to the vision, even when everyone disagreed with me, and plow forward. And I think a lot of people think that's what leadership is. Even if people think you're wrong, you just hold on to that and you preserve that. I think that is important, to know what you believe and hold on to it, but not just plow forward, not just blaze past everyone, but you convert them to it. You're able to communicate it and get people on board and lead them in that way. And we just watched the film Moneyball
Super good.
somewhat recently, and we were talking about leadership in regards to this film. So, quick synopsis.
Billy Bean is a former Major League Baseball player for the New York Mets, and he's sort of jaded, but now he's working a couple decades later as their general manager. And he's sort of the young guy on the team of scouts who are all old guys who've been doing this for way longer than he's been alive. And he cannot seem to win the championship games, or they always lose an elimination match, even after a really good season. And
Because of money, they're competing
with like $33 million against something like $140+ million for the New York
the good teams
Yankees,
just
you know.
buy all the good players that everyone wants.
And so he kind of discovers this new approach with this character that's personified by Jonah Hill. The actor is Jonah Hill. I don't remember the character's name. And they sort of team up and say, what if we just changed the whole game of baseball by playing the numbers based on this algorithm that Jonah Hill has come up with, where everyone's guessing as to who's going to be a great player, and they're sort of staffing these dream teams, and it's like fantasy football, but it's an archaic sort of emotional game that they're playing with money. And the only way to really win consistently is to see who can get on base and who as a team will get the numbers to work so that you can sort of get on base and score points and win baseball games. And so
yeah, based on the system, there were a lot of players who had the most runs, but people weren't considering them because they were getting old or because they'd had an injury or whatever.
They weren't, you know, sexy home run hitters. You know, they weren't the superstar sort of profile.
But if you were going solely by the numbers, they
got on base and
they were the ones who got the most runs. So that's sort of the setup of the story. Good little synopsis there. It's a good film. I enjoyed it. And so this guy, what's his name? Billy Bean, who's the general manager, sets forward with this plan, and he's blazing a trail. He's being a pioneer. He's having to go against a lot of people who disagree with him,
including the coach of the team.
And it doesn't work at first. And the coach is very against what he's trying to do. He won't cooperate with him.
He won't play the players that they've told him to play. They're putting other people up to bat and playing outfield and stuff.
And no one believes in him. And the numbers are not supporting it because
they're losing games.
Because the coach isn't supporting it. And so it's not going to work unless everyone can kind of be on board. So on the one hand, that's inspiring that he he eventually kind of forces his way.
Yeah, he fires some people. He trades a lot of players. Like if this coach keeps playing players that he didn't want, he'd just trade them
Yeah.
so that he couldn't keep playing them. And he had to play the players that he wanted to put on the field.
So he forces his way until it starts to work. And then everyone's like, oh, okay, what's this method? And they jump on board and they want to pay him lots of money. And suddenly everyone trusts him because he's super successful. But at first, everyone was against him and he had to fight and blaze forward. But I do think as I watched that film that he could have done a better job of explaining, at least in this narrative. I don't know what the real person was like because it's based on a real story, but
Right. It's based on a real story, but they took, I'm sure, plenty of
lots of creative liberty.
interpretive. Yeah.
But just based on the film, at least, I think he could have explained himself more, explained what his method was and why he was choosing the players that he was, and not expect people to blindly follow him, but help them to see the way he sees and get on board. I
Paint
think
the
that would have
vision.
been a lot better than just blazing forward and then
Yeah.
later people want to work with him.
So those quotes you were saying were kind of like mentioning vision. They were mentioning pioneering, which he kind of takes a vision and makes it into reality. He does just go forward and pioneer, and eventually other people, especially other teams, get on board, and he becomes the guy who gets a job offer that would have made him the highest paid general manager in sports at the end of all of this, because they realized that he was the guy who'd figured this out. And then in the end, everyone just kind of copied his system anyway. But what he didn't do was what you were saying, which was focus on the people. He didn't paint that vision for anyone but himself and maybe a few people, but not his whole team. He didn't. Now, I will push back against that, because in the movie, he paints the vision for the players. He starts to break his own code because he never travels with the team. He never talks to the teammates because he's the general manager. He's the guy who has to say, you're packing up, you're traded to another team, and we're bringing in another player. And he doesn't want to be emotionally connected to them. But he eventually kind of breaks that, and he starts to explain to them, this is how you're going to play the game based on the system we're doing. And you're going to focus on runs, and you're not going to bunt it this way. You're going to swing it this way, or you're going to hit this way. And he just explains the vision. Like, this is why we put you on this team, was to do this thing that you do. And so at that part, I think there was some great leadership going on, but man, his scouts hated him. His coach fought him, and he really didn't. He just kind of pushed it right. He just bulldozed right through them.
Yeah.
And there might be a time in a season for that, but at least in the movie land.
It's just interesting that the one person who opposed him the most, which was the coach, and could have almost single-handedly brought down the whole project, was the one person I didn't feel like he ever explained the vision to.
Yeah, he never, at least in the movie.
At least in the movie.
We recognize that this is based on a true story, and we aren't making any statements about the actual people who were involved in that story. And, whatever he did, it worked. And so he might have actually done a better job of this in real life than the movie portrayed. But we love the film. It was such a good movie.
It is
so well
very
written.
good, yeah.
I think it's one of my favorite performances I've ever seen Brad Pitt act in. It is some of his best acting. And yeah, great movie.
So I do have some quotes that I found that I actually thought were really nice and valid.
Hit me.
Okay. So the first one is Martin Luther King Jr., and he was a great leader, as we know, the civil rights movement. He said, "A genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus."
That's not the typical vinyl plaque. What do you think of that?
Well, I think I agree with it, because I think being a leader is not looking for everyone to agree with you all the time. This is the tricky balance, right? It's not just finding people who agree or bending what you believe in to match what people want.
Calling for a vote every time there's a disagreement, kind of a thing.
It's molding consensus. It's helping people agree by sharing your vision clearly and addressing their doubts.
Yep, unifying everyone behind a vision.
You don't just find them and lead them, you kind of create them.
I think in theory that sounds really nice. Honestly, part of me wonders if there's a give and take there, because I'm thinking about filmmaking.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about staffing a crew and being like, hey, so like, I'm going to hire you, I don't know, I'm just thinking of random examples, random DP, and they're like, yes, I only work with 35 millimeters and 50 millimeter lenses. I'm actually quoting an actual DP who DP'd a really big movie that you probably saw in theaters. I have no issue with that, by the way. But if this was like a Carol Ballard film about a little boy on an island with a horse, and we were like, we're going to get as far away from the actor as possible and shoot on super long telephoto lenses and just make it very documentary, that DP might not be the best person to hire. And so at that point, I'm like, maybe I am searching for consensus, at least searching for someone whose inclinations are already not going to require me to, like do a lot of conversion,
Mhm.
But at the same time, once you have staffed it, it is your job, I think, especially what Martin Luther King here is saying, to your point, to really inspire a mutual understanding of this is what we're all doing, and this is what I need your help as a team to accomplish. And this is why it's going to be so great and why it matters so much, and painting that vision for everyone in a way that they can understand it.
Well, and I also think following is elective. It's a choice. And so if you're clear up front with the expectations and the vision, then people who electively choose to follow will hopefully be trusting and supportive of their leader, or they can leave. But I don't think it's the job of the leader to change people or force them to follow. It's just, if you're going to follow me, this is what we're doing. And this is my vision, and being able to communicate that clearly so that even a follower might have doubt. A follower might wonder at times about what the leader they're following is doing. And a good leader, I think, can address those doubts.
Yeah.
I don't think I was necessarily a good leader on this film, to be honest. So I've learned a lot of this through my mistakes, and now my perception of it has changed a lot. I think there's a lot more I could have done on set to help people understand what I was trying to accomplish. And if they disagreed, instead of just blazing forward and saying, well, I'm doing it anyway, and you don't understand, to take the time to acquire understanding.
Yeah, I think a lot about Jordan Peele, who directed Get Out. In a DGA podcast interview, he talks about kind of both of those situations where his norm on set was exactly what you're explaining. If there was an actor and the actor wasn't getting there or things weren't clicking in the scene, he would just step aside and just walk it out with them. And he said, I acted as if we had all day, which we didn't, but I treated it like that. Like, listen, let's just talk it out and figure it out. And I've actually experienced that as a cinematographer on a short film when I got really frustrated because I had made some promises and I had practiced and practiced, and then rigging started to fail. And I felt really upset. And I felt like I was failing the film. I was failing the director. I was failing people and the movie. And that director stepped me aside and said, hey, look, this is what's happening and we can't stop it. The thing isn't working and we're not going to get it to work. And we don't have time to go fix it or change it or swap it out or buy something. We don't have the money to fix the problem. So what are we going to do? He didn't even ask what we're going to do. He says, here's what I think we should do moving forward. Let's just do this part handheld because this rig thing isn't working. And I think it'll work really nicely and we can make it work and we'll tell the story. But he walked me off set and walked with me until I felt like I could calm down and say, all right, this is the new direction that the leader has set forth, sort of a thing. And I can get behind that. Let's do that. And then step back into it. And then the team kind of comes back together and we can do it. And that's kind of what Jordan Peele described. And I think that's creating, what do you say? Consensus.
Mm-hmm.
It's that like helping people feel comfortable and unified. And on the other side, Jordan Peele talked about a day where his AD just came to him and said, listen, we can't do this today. This is what we have to get to make our day. And he said there was one scene where the whole cast basically was like, this makes no sense. And he said, you're just going to have to trust me. I know this is going to work. We've been doing great work all the way up to this point. You're going to have to trust me. Let's just give it a try. But we've got to do it. We've just got to do it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but it will work. This is going to work in the story. And he's like, the whole cast revolted on him. Like they were just upset with him until they did it. And then he said it worked. And that was when I realized I was director, is what he said, which I thought was really interesting. And so it was kind of the Moneyball thing and the Martin Luther King thing. You just have to sometimes, I think, there's times and seasons. And his norm is the Martin Luther King thing. It's creating the consensus and working with people. But when you've established 2 weeks of that on set, you might be able to afford to take a day and say, listen, you're just going to have to trust me, because you've got 2 weeks of mutual, kind, patient understanding built up. But if you try and do that on day one, I don't think you're going to get very far. And you might even succeed on day one, but on day 2 and 3, you're going to be starting behind, and people are going to start the day already upset with you, already feeling like you're just doing your own thing, and they're going to start to feel useless. Like, I'm just a robot here and I'm just going to take orders, and I guess I don't really matter. And so anyway, hopefully that wasn't much of a tangent, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to synthesize all
No,
these
I think
things.
that's a great contribution. I love that story. It's, I think, the great challenge of leadership. And I dare say the greatest challenge I faced on this feature film was that balance between doing what you believe is best and people disagreeing with you and trying to get them on board or trying to help them understand. And that requires being able to communicate clearly. But even if you communicate clearly, sometimes people will choose not to trust you. You could say that take was good, we got it, and they just might not believe you. And you might not have time to stop and look at it every time. You might not be able to wait or take the time to convince them. You might have to move on to get everything. And so it's a huge challenge. And I think it astounds me how many directors I've heard talk about this challenge since, who have had such immense resources at their hands as far as time and money and talent. And yet it's still a challenge.
They're
It's
still
still that
fighting the clock.
compromise. It's always the compromise.
Did we get it? Do we move on? Is everyone mad at me?
Yeah, there's always something you have to compromise, and you have to know, when do I compromise this take or this scene or the time that we have today? And when do I compromise the potential trust that I've built up with my team or my actors? It's very hard, very hard.
Well, let's talk about parenting. Can we move on to that? Or did you want to read a couple quotes?
I have a few more quotes that I think will relate well to parenting.
Great.
To help us transition there. I'll just read them all and then we can just talk about them all.
Segue.
So, quick quote reading. This is Ronald Reagan. He said, "The greatest leader is not necessarily the one who does the greatest things. He is the one that gets the people to do the greatest things." Again, I love that because it's focused on people and not just on what you do, which you could do by yourself, and or what you convince people to do or force them to do. It's that you inspire people to do great things.
You know, that reminds me of this basketball player whose name escapes me, whose team escapes me. Some really influential MVP player said, so I'm paraphrasing obviously because I'm really reaching back into the recesses of my long-term memory, but I just remember him saying that his success was not defined by his accomplishments. It was defined by his teammates' accomplishments. That's kind of what that Ronald Reagan, I think it's Reagan. Reagan?
Maybe.
You know, phonetically, Reagan would make more sense. I wasn't alive in the 80s, so I'll never know. Anyway, but yeah, that's what that quote reminded me of. And I've thought about that quote often. And that makes me think, I got to say this while it's relevant because I've been thinking about it, that to me, leadership is investment. I really feel like investors that, so just talking about movies still, investors that invest in me as a filmmaker, those are people that are willing to risk for another person's opportunity. That's a huge deal to me. And then once I have those resources sort of allocated to my project that I am steward over, I am now investing in the DP and in the director and in the writer and in the actors, all the people that I staff on that film in conjunction with other department heads. You know, like, I'm investing in those people in a way. I'm giving opportunities, job opportunities, and also creative opportunities to vocalize and articulate themselves through this medium, through the department, through the, you know, that part of the craft that they are stewards over. So I'm risking on them. And that, I'm thinking so much about this lately. We've been talking about it all week when it's all coming together. That idea of believing in someone, believing in them so much that you're going to sacrifice for them, that you're going to make huge risks for them. That to me is where real leadership rubber hits the road of reality. Anyway, it's that willingness to invest, that willingness to risk on another human being. There's something there to me about leadership. And I just think about the movie Hobson's Choice. Please go watch it if you haven't seen it. Directed by David Lean. I believe it was
Can't go wrong with
1953.
David Lean.
David Lean's so good. So good. And Hobson's Choice is my favorite David Lean movie. It's the one hardly anyone has ever seen. And the other one we watched was My Fair Lady. My Fair Lady was an interesting one because the investor was sort of a misogynist. It was kind of strange, but my Hobson's Choice is just this person who, I mean, basically risks her whole life on this person, on this guy. She sets out to marry him. She sets out to start a business with him. She sets out to educate him. He can't even read because she just believes in him.
When he doesn't even believe in himself.
Yeah, it's like a total shift of self-concept for him to believe any of this stuff. And he's trying to fight the whole endeavor until he realizes that this lady's sincere and that she does love him. She does believe in him. She truly believes he's the greatest bootmaker in all of, Manchester area and all this stuff. And that movie, to watch the transformation that happens in that other guy, she, Maggie, the character's name, is like the greatest leader in cinema history. She's so amazing. And it's just, that movie is a joy to watch. And I just think that has become, at least for my heart, what I am starting to feel like I want to be as a leader, like someone who gives other people opportunities and just invests hard time and money and risk in other people, believing that they're going to raise everything up. And I've found that that has made me more money, saved me more time, made me look more good. I don't know if that sentence makes sense, but it works. And, anyway, the clause might not make as much sense, but it works in the context of the whole sentence. Makes me look more good than anything I could do to invest in myself, like pay myself more money or try and save myself more time or work faster or try and make myself look aggrandized or good. And that's kind of what Jesus teaches, right? He's abase yourself and lift others and you'll be exalted. But if you try and exalt yourself, you'll be abased because, who likes being around a person who's like, I'm the best all the time, right?
Well, I do think that's what some people think leadership is. And I think that's where it fails. When people are like, I want to be in the spotlight. I want it to be about me. I want everyone to serve me. But really the greatest leaders are servants. And they're all about, I want to serve you. I want your success.
Was that the Daniel Pink thing you were talking to me about?
Yeah, Daniel Pink teaches a masterclass on persuasion. And he talks about...
He writes a lot of books too.
How to map out the dynamics at a conversation with multiple people. And he actually takes a scene from a film and maps out this conversation and who's talking to who and talks about who's the most powerful at that table, the most powerful influencer. And there was someone at that table who was talking a lot. And at first glance, she might seem powerful because she's speaking a lot. But he points out that usually the person who's trying to speak the most is trying very hard to be persuasive, but they actually aren't.
They're trying to be the leader, the most influential person in the room.
They're the one who's trying the hardest, but the one who's actually the most influential is usually very quiet. And yet they're the person who everyone else is speaking to and taking note of. And
when they do open their mouths,
yeah,
that's when everyone like shuts up and listens, and you can sense it. And I've seen this in Hollywood Reporter roundtable interviews where you see this whole table of people talking, and then Alfonso Cuarón, who's coming off of the Best Director win on Gravity, says one word, and everyone just goes and just gets quiet and listens to what he has to say. And there's other people at that table really throwing their weight around, trying
big
to like
newbies,
seem,
and they're like,
trying to seem really bright and amazing. And anytime he just says a small little comment, it's kind of profound, and everyone's like, oh, like, yeah, listen to what Alfonso has to say. It's like, I've seen that in several different Hollywood Reporter interviews. There's like one director that everyone has the most respect for around the table, and then there's like one or two that are just verbally trying to win a game. They're trying to seem like the bee's knees, So that's such a reality, I feel like Daniel Pink is pointing out there.
It's such an interesting thing where if we think that leadership is all being in the spotlight and glory and praises, then we won't achieve it. But if we understand that leadership is serving and being a servant and helping other people and glorifying other people, that's really where you become a great leader.
Yeah, and it comes with a lot of responsibility. Like, it's not, now I'm the biggest leader in the room, and some people don't want to be leaders or have that responsibility, probably because they understand it a little better. But the people who seem to think that it just means everyone does what you tell them to do without questioning you are wrong. No matter how respected and loved and admired a leader is, they get tons of resistance. I don't know if there's like a single more beloved president than Abraham Lincoln. Who historically can anyone look back and say, oh, he was the worst? Everyone pretty much agrees that he was a great leader. He has aged well with history. And yet at the time, he probably had to face more opposition than anyone in the world. He had to preside over the Civil War. Like no other president has been so hated that half the country declared war, and I mean, he was assassinated. He had more resistance than any other leader.
Same with Christ.
Yeah, same with Jesus Christ, same with pretty much all great leaders in history. And Gandhi was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. These are the people that everyone like admires and loves almost universally now. And at the time, that leadership was like, you're gonna have to go through hell, right? Like you've got to go through just massive, massive opposition. And you have to lead teams that are sometimes reluctant. And you've just got to do your best.
Well, that's why I love that film. Oh, what is it? The Martin Luther King film.
Selma.
I love that film because it was the first time when I watched it that I had considered that he, as a leader, did not know he would be successful. He received resistance. He had his own doubts, and he had to kind of stand up and try to believe that this would work in the face of a lot of people who did not believe it would work, and a lot of circumstances where it seemed like it wasn't working. And it's so easy for us to look back now and say, of course that was going to work. Of course he was right. But for him in that day, he faced so much resistance, and it was hard to be a leader and to hold on to what he thought would work and just try it and see it all the way through.
Same with Moneyball. The thing that Moneyball does so well as a script is that you get to a point where I, as an audience member, at least I got to a point where I thought, I think this is going to blow up in his face. I think at the end of this, it's going to fail so hard. It's going to seem like it's working, like it's failing, and then it's maybe working, and then it's going to fail so hard that it's just going to ruin him. And he's going to have to learn this hard lesson about not being a bully or something. I don't know. I wasn't sure where the film was going, but it really convinced you that there's no way you could believe that this is going to work. And he's afraid to admit that maybe it couldn't. Because you see that when he's alone, he's experiencing major self-doubt. But when he's in front of everyone else, he's like, I believe this thing. It's going to work. It's 100%. He's having to talk to the owners, right? The guys that are investing in him, that have hired him, the owners of the team. And he's like, yeah, of course, this is going to work. It's going to work great. And then he's alone and he's banging his head against the steering wheel, and it reminds me of David McClure talking about history. And he said, you realize that people in the past didn't think that they were living in the past. They didn't walk around saying, look at our powdered wigs and look how quaint we are, walking around in the past. And he said they didn't know that the 1776 Revolutionary War was going to be successful. For them, this was life and death, and they had no idea what was going to happen, but they signed the Declaration anyway. And he said so much of it was determined by the decisions and the personality of a single person. I just love that David McClure points that out. You've got to remember that history wasn't history to these guys. It was clear and present danger. It was real life, right? So I think just to your point with Selma, yeah, like it was
real leadership.
It was immediate. It was, yeah,
is going to feel that way.
Yeah, when you
no
get
matter
there.
who you are, even if you're Christ and you're perfect.
And yet, sometimes it helps me to think that way about it. When I look back on this, sometimes I think if I was looking back on this as my future self and everything feels like it's raining down on me and it's all crumbling to pieces, I think my future self looking back is going to say, this was a story to tell. One day, all this opposition, all this difficulty, one day I'm going to look back and say, I'm going to tell this story and be like, look at this lesson I learned. And what will the lesson be that I want to say? And I'm just going to say, this is a time where I need to believe the vision I had, or this is a time when I need to listen to these people and maybe open up my mind. And that just kind of helps me see things clearer when I pretend like I am looking at the past, maybe against what David McClure is saying people actually experience in real life. So
yeah, I'll read a few more quotes here. This is John Maxwell. I'm not sure who that is, but he said, leaders become great not because of their power, but because of their ability to empower others. So along those same lines, Alexander Den Heijer said, when I talk to my managers, I get the feeling they're important. When I talk to leaders, I get the feeling I'm important. Made me think of Mr. Rogers, actually.
Yeah. It's like this feeling of inspiration. Don't you feel inspired? When a leader is speaking to you, you feel like inspired. I think the feeling of feeling inspired is like, I have a role to play in this great thing we're doing. I'm important to this thing we're doing. And maybe I feel for a moment that it all depends on me. If you're an actor, or if you're a DP, or if you're a director, it never all depends on you. It depends on everybody. But when you feel that for a moment, sometimes it's a good feeling, like someone just inspires you, like, this is worth fighting for. This is worth working for. This is worth sacrificing for. That's a cool quote. I like that.
Yeah. Okay, I saved the best for last. At least for me, this quote helped me the most to feel like I could apply it to parenting and to filmmaking and everything. And I actually don't know who said this quote, so
It's just a big black
it's
Pinteresty
just,
looking
yeah, I
box.
just liked it.
Maybe some random like person at Hallmark came up with it.
Well, it's kind of nice because I feel like real leaders are quiet. Like you almost don't know that they did it because they convince everyone that
Anonymous.
they convince everyone that the team did it. You actually feel like you accomplished it because they believed in you and supported you the whole way.
That's true.
I feel like some of the best leaders are that way. They're kind of invisible.
Well, to the quote,
which says, leaders don't create followers, they create more leaders.
I love that quote, honey.
It's simple, but it stuck with me.
Yeah. It's deceptively sort of platitude-ish or simple, but I don't think it's platitude-ish. I think it's really profound, actually. I could think about that all day tomorrow, I think.
This actually changed the way I parented today. And I know I'm just starting to apply it, but all day today I thought about my kids and I thought, if I'm a good leader, I'm creating leaders,
not followers.
I'm not just saying, okay, if she bothers you, come talk to me about it and I'll solve the problem. I'm going to teach my children how to work this out themselves. I'm going to show them how to be a leader so that when I'm not around, they know what to do. And I don't know, it's hard to explain the difference that it made, but I just felt like I was creating independent little people instead of expecting them to rely on me, which I don't actually want. I don't want to have to always be the one to step in and solve the problems and do things. I want them to be independent. I want them to know how to do things on their own. And I'm a better leader if I do that. If I actually teach them, this is what I would do. This is why I would do it this way. Here's how you can do it this way. And they start to understand, whether it's working things out amongst themselves or even stuff like, this is why I clean the house. This is why I choose to eat healthy. This is why it's good to wear new underwear every day, was a conversation I had with Marshall. And if I believe that he's a leader, that conversation looks different than when I think I'm the leader and I have to teach him. It's hard to explain.
Yeah, well, because it's not always teaching. If you're not teaching them to lead themselves, then you're not teaching them. You're just trying to make them follow you. You're trying to make them blindly do everything you ask them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, and sometimes there's a time and a place for that, not just as a leader, but as a follower. There's times when I just have to say, you know what, I'm going to put my faith in this leader and do exactly what they say, and I have no idea why. And I might even have my doubts about it. But I have sometimes found great power in that. And there are times and places for that.
And I did want to touch on that.
But most of the time, I agree with what you're saying. Well, we want them to learn how to lead themselves. We want them to become masters of themselves. And so you teach them why they need to wear new underwear every day, right?
Yeah,
so that it becomes their decision, not just
because
your
I said
decision.
So. Yeah. I don't want them to believe in me. I want them to believe in truth.
And in themselves.
And in the principles that I believe in, that I want to teach him,
like the principle
and pass them on.
Clean underwear.
Well, and he didn't understand why that mattered, and we talked about it.
And how on earth would you assume that they would?
Yeah.
It's not like they're born with this knowledge of what germs are. That's actually, I've realized, kind of a complex concept to explain to a child. It's like, they're like microscopic animals. Microscopic means bugs, they're like little tiny bugs you can't see. And they make you sick somehow by magic.
And then he says, I want to buy a microphone and look at all the germs in the bathroom.
A microphone, he said.
Anyway, I really liked that quote. I feel like when you see others as leaders, you see them as equals. You see them as like, there's this mutual respect for that person that may not exist if you just see that as someone who works for me or someone who is helping me or following me. But if you say, like, this is a leader and I'm going to treat them that way, I think that they feel that respect and they're more likely to step up to that. And I think that Christ is a good example of that as well. A perfect example of servant leadership, but also he ministered to his followers. He had people who didn't follow him and he didn't really regard them. He moved forward with what he knew and what he was teaching. And he taught his apostles to be independent leaders when he was gone so that they could stand on their own.
And that took a lot of work.
It was a lot of work.
Like,
yeah.
They were like little children. He even called them that sometimes. And I don't think he was trying to be condescending. I often feel like a little child sometimes, like I'm faking it, or I don't understand what's going on, or I'm trying to figure stuff out. And then the simplest thing suddenly makes sense. And I go, oh, I've just had this major breakthrough, but it wasn't like I figured out a calculus problem. It's like I figured out 1 + 1, I feel like that. And I, like last week, like I feel like I'm having these things that I'm just starting to understand. And so, yeah, it's what we're doing. We're trying to help people become leaders on their own. And I think that's awesome. It's just great.
So I think just really quick on the flip side, we kind of said we'd touch on this as followers because we all are also followers. We choose to follow people. We choose to join together with people. I think we also have a responsibility to trust. And a lot of people have this idea that trust has to be earned, which usually means if you meet my expectations, I will choose to trust you.
Or if you somehow impress me or seem smarter than me or whatever.
Yeah, or if you have the history, which makes it really easy to trust.
Usually I feel like that's what people want. They want
like,
you to
make it really easy for me to trust you and then I'll trust you.
Yeah, which trust actually is an investment. It has risk and it can be, you can doubt it and it can be a little scary sometimes. Yeah,
that's how you invest in people.
But that's true leadership is followship. Following, like
just like back and forth. Yeah.
Well, and that I've heard so much that to be a good leader, you must first become a great follower. And I've always wondered what that meant. And like going back to Jesus, he talks about how he's done nothing save his Father hath commanded him. He's like, I don't do anything. I'm always just following the Father, kind of a thing. I'm not doing it of myself. And, I still see this in Hobson's Choice. She's not trying to lead everything and be the biggest, best everything. She's trying to put this person that she believes in front.
Yeah.
And she does it in the movie. Like because David Lean's a genius, he blocks it so that she will be in the background doing all the talking, but he will be in the foreground, kind of simultaneously being the front man for the business and hearing what she is saying about him, because she's selling him, she's touting him, she's putting him up on the pedestal and saying how great he is. And he's starting to believe this stuff that she's saying about him, which is like in that moment, changing his self-concept is like, wow, that's who I am, or that's who she thinks I am. And how that's transforming him while he is sitting in front of the investor who they're asking for, all this money. And it's just, she is following him by basically saying like, I'm going to die for this person. I believe in them so much. I will follow them to the ends of the earth. And yet she really was the leader.
That's this whole thing. Leaders don't create followers. They create more leaders.
Exactly. That's how she was the leader. She created this man out of nothing.
She was a leader because she was a follower, because she was willing to say, you can be a leader.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be your faithful follower, and I'm going to stick with you and believe in you and invest in you and take a risk in you.
She did all of those things before he knew how to read, before he knew how to lead, before he knew how to talk and
run a business
and speak in front of a group of 4 people, and she believed before he quote unquote earned her trust.
Yeah.
She invested her trust in him because she believed in what he could become. And shoot, man, it's so mind-blowing. I can't remember what I was going to say next, but it's so good.
So I think that's an important thing to realize as followers and as leaders who are creating leaders and being followers in that way too, is that trust is a choice. We choose to trust someone. And no matter what the odds are, you can choose to trust someone. And no matter what the successes are, you could choose not to trust someone. But I feel like if you're going to follow, then I see no upside to following someone and not choosing to trust them.
Yeah, not fully investing your trust in them,
because
risking your trust in them.
If we go back to the Moneyball example, the coach who didn't trust in him almost single-handedly destroyed the whole project, because if not everyone was participating and on board, it wouldn't work. You had to believe in it and really try it all the way through for it to work. And when it's a team dynamic, that's often the case. One person, by not believing or not trusting, could bring it all down.
So true. And one quote I remember, it might have been from John Maxwell, that guy you didn't know who he was, was the only thing more contagious than a positive attitude is a negative one. Negative attitudes are infectious. If you start to complain about a director on set behind that director's back, you really can destroy a film. It's possible to just ruin the whole thing, and it is poisonous. I was warned about it by producers and by teachers in school. They were like, do everything you can. If you're on a crew, if you are a grip, do whatever you can to stop negative gossip, because it will infest a crew so fast and ruin stuff. And I think that's true in life. That's true, that's why I just don't believe in like ever saying anything bad about my parents.
Yeah.
I just don't believe in complaining about them. My parents had way worse parents than my parents. And my parents were pretty, I actually love my grandparents, at least on my dad's side. I didn't know my grandparents on my mom's side, and my family history is kind of complicated. And there was even some history of abuse and stuff, not from my parents, but to my parents, mainly my mom. That's why I don't know my mom's side. But just, I only bring that up because my parents have given me this life that I had no right to receive from someone who was raised under poverty, abuse, sort of just, there were various degrees of people working with addictions. It wasn't like all bad, especially my dad's family wasn't all bad, but it was pretty complicated stuff. And so what good would it do for me as a child to complain and gossip with my siblings
Right.
about them when really they've done more than I'll ever be able to pay back? And I think that's the case with, these are people, these producers, these directors, your department heads, whoever, they hired you, they're risking on you. You need to trust in the fact that they hired you is a risk.
Yeah.
So you, in turn,
They first loved you and invested in you.
Yeah, they've already earned your trust
by risking on you.
So now you need to risk on them and fight for them. And one more leadership masterclass, go watch or rewatch, in whichever case you're in, The Hunt for the Red October, and watch the behavior of Ramius, played by Sean Connery, his first mate, who has to believe in this guy who's trying to do something very difficult, defect and give a nuclear submarine to the United States of America. And watch Ramius, what he's willing to do and what he will not do as a leader, and how he leads. That whole movie is like a masterclass on leadership. But I think watch the first mate and watch how the first mate takes the weight of defending his leader, even when he does not understand his captain's decisions.
Yeah.
He will fight and defend the captain's decisions to all of the rest of his officers and crew, even when he is himself doubting and confused. That, to me, shows the first mate is an incredible leader, because he's fighting for the captain. And without him, the whole operation would have failed. Without that first mate, the operation would have failed.
Yeah. So I think as a follower, it's important to be careful with criticism. It's really probably not responsible to continue with a team if you're going to criticize, or if you're going to tear down or doubt. And just also that doubt has to exist. If everyone agrees, then there's no trust. There's no need for trust. Leaders are people who have to convert believers, and believers have to choose to trust when it isn't easy, when there is room for doubt, when maybe you don't have a history of success, when we haven't tried this untraditional method before, whatever it is. Stick with it. If you're going to do it, stick with it and don't criticize it, and see it through to the end. Because otherwise, I'm afraid if I didn't do that, I could be the one that sinks the ship. I could be the reason that it didn't succeed because I complain, or because
and the bitter truth
against it.
The bitter truth that gossipers and complainers have to face is that they probably secretly want the ship to sink, because they know that the person in leadership is going to be the one that takes the blame and takes the fall for it. So what they're trying to do is they feel resentment, or they feel anger, or they feel bitterness toward the leader, and they're thinking this is failing because of them. And to prove themselves right, they are sort of undermining the project and trying to cause it to fail, to prove that that leader is causing it to fail, which seems to them that it's going to work. Now, there's a part of that inside all of us, so I'm not trying to point anyone out or say that like everyone in a sort of a position where they're able to follow a leader like is that way. I'm saying that this is something that all of us have to leaders and followers, because everyone's a leader, right? And
Mhm.
everyone's a follower. All of us need to learn that skill of recognizing that inside of us, that desire to blame and bring people down who are maybe over us so that they can take the fall, which is secretly us trying to make the whole thing sink. Like, it's a very pernicious cycle.
Well, we've talked about briefly the shame blame cycle, how if we feel shame, we have a tendency to then blame because shame doesn't feel comfortable. Thinking it's our fault doesn't feel good, even if we're just involved. Oh, I chose to follow this person and now it's going to fail. You might feel some fear that it won't turn out. And in your defense, in that fear, you might try to be right. You might try to say, oh, this is going to fail before it does, as if that somehow protects you. But really, it's to your detriment if it sinks the ship.
Mhm.
It's not going to protect you. It's actually making it more likely that it will fail. But it's an easy thing to do if we feel fear to try to blame. I think it's important on team efforts to not try to point any finger of blame, just try to say, what do we do? What's the solution? Something happened. Maybe we can say it's someone's fault, maybe not. Regardless, let's move forward and make the best thing we possibly can given the situation.
Keep faith, keep believing, and know that this is something that happens to every project. This is something that happens in every family. I
Every
think
person makes mistakes.
parents, I think, will often feel like failures, and we just have to, at some point when we feel like we failed beyond repair, just say, listen, every great movie has a story like this where they thought that all was lost. Every great parent has felt like a failure, you know, or they feel like their kid is irretrievable, you know, and it's just not true. So just keep believing, keep trusting, keep investing, keep, leading and keep following. So,
Yeah. And I think if you're on the receiving end of criticism, I would say, first of all, don't let that derail you. I mean, if it's someone who's following you and they're really concerned, then you can have a talk with them and try to understand and try to maybe be humble and see what you can improve. But if it's someone who's not following you or who is contrary, that's where you probably need to stick to what you believe and what you believe about yourself and be able to say, that person is wrong about me. And that's okay. People are going to be wrong. They're going to misunderstand. They won't know all the details. And people who criticize usually have not been in that same position before. Really, nobody has ever been in your same position before, in your same exact circumstances. One last thing, I heard this on another Hollywood table read.
Hollywood Reporter Roundtable.
Yes, thank you. I knew you would remember the name. Jamie Foxx was talking about running into George Bush, and that he asked him, would you ever say something bad about Obama? And George Bush was like, no way, never. Because I've been in his shoes. I know how hard that job is. I know how hard that position is. And I feel like I experienced that making this film. My respect for directors after becoming one raised significantly, regardless of what they've directed. It's like, yeah, that first film you made was awful and it didn't actually turn out how you wanted, but you made it. That's amazing. And I just realized what a huge job it was and how difficult it was. And I think people who do understand will not criticize because they understand. And if you're criticizing, maybe consider that, you haven't been in that position. You don't know what it's like. You don't know all the details. And criticizing doesn't help.
Yeah. I don't know if this is related, but something just came to my mind. I feel like it's related. Is that I remember being an employee for a few years before we decided to kind of break out on our own and become self-employed. And I think I needed to be self-employed and be the direct point of contact with all of my clients for a few years to truly learn how to become a great employee. And I really do feel like that taught me, like, I don't think I understood being an employee. I didn't understand the point of having a job or having a boss. And I still don't want to do that ever again, but not because it was like the worst thing in the whole world. I had some really great jobs. I had some wonderful bosses, one in particular, but I really just felt inclined to self-employment for some reason. It's just a personal thing. But after doing it for so long, man, I started to go, I could be such a great employee because I know what the employer is going through now. And it's just like what you're saying, like that director position, I don't want to just be all bagging on them and like making things harder for them because I'm realizing the weight on their shoulders, especially a first-time director. It's like, man, you want to just invest and believe and trust that person to the ends of the earth because that's what they need. They need someone who's going to do that. And that's what you feel like you need when you're doing it. And so you've talked about ADing potentially some feature films after this, just because I think it would be so wonderful to have someone who's like, hey, look, it's like that first mate on Hunt for the Red October. It's like, I will die for you. Like I will
be that person.
Fight for you and absorb all that negative energy and like invest in you. And I think everybody needs someone like that. And most glittering, glorious, amazing stories that we hear about people who just explode out of nowhere and they achieve huge success. Somewhere behind the scenes, there's a person like that. And I have always talked about how everyone needs a Suzuki because Suzuki was Hayao Miyazaki's producer from the beginning, who came off of, I think he was working on manga or like publications on a newspaper. And he ended up believing in Miyazaki as an animator. He was like, he's so good and he has a really interesting story sense. And he started developing projects with Miyazaki, and then Suzuki was the guy in all of the rooms going to bat for Miyazaki. Miyazaki was the guy who got famous, and this is not a dig at Miyazaki. I love Hayao Miyazaki and his work, and I love his leadership style, and I've learned a lot from him. Not personally, I wish I could drop his name and talk about how I know Hayao Miyazaki, but I don't. But he had Suzuki going to bat, pitching all of his movies, getting the funding, and believing in him. And I remember when I watched sort of that little it was kind of a cheesy little documentary talking about the history of Studio Ghibli. That's, I think, when it hit me that I was like, I could sit around and hope to become Hayao Miyazaki my whole life and hope that someone's just going to believe in me my whole life. Or I could decide to be a Suzuki and I could go out and make 10 Miyazakis or 100.
I think that's the key. Like, you have to be a good follower to be a great leader.
Yeah, a great investor. I'm not super rich. I can't fund people's movies, but I have something. I have time, I have belief, I have love, I have some talent, and whatever I do have, I'm going to invest it, and I can invest it in other people as hard as I can. And when I believe in someone, I believe in my capacity to bring that person up. And that has actually increased, I think, my own self-confidence and belief in myself more than I ever could have done trying to do that for myself for the last 5 years. I think I would actually probably be in some sort of a depressive slump if that's what I'd been trying to do for the last 5 years. I'd be alone and I'd be still trying to convince everyone why I'm so great and why they should invest in me. And that's really hard. I don't really think it works. And if it works, it's not sustainable, or it's just not a happy way to live. So
yeah, I just had this image in my mind of an upside down pyramid.
I think a period is the same, right side up or upside down.
Yeah, it's getting late. An upside down pyramid and someone at the bottom lifting people on top. And instead of trying to be a leader at the very top on top of everyone else, like servant leadership being an upside down pyramid. And the more people you lift up and hold up above you, the stronger you are. Versus like if you're just holding yourself up, you're weak. Like if you're climbing on top of other people to stand at the top, you're actually weak. But when you lift people up, you become this pillar of strength. And
interesting.
I don't know, that just like image popped into my head.
I like it. But at some point as a leader, I also have found myself realizing that I am on top of the pyramid, not because I'm great or I have all this power, but because if all these supports were gone, it's humbling to realize where I'd be. And that's something else I've thought about in terms of pyramids. All these people here electively supporting this vision, supporting this thing that we are creating, that I am leading. All these people are to some degree investing and trusting in me. And that is humbling. Like if you forget what put you at the top, that's when revolution happens. or when humility happens, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
You just it will fall apart. So, well, I've learned a lot. I'm really glad that you prepped some quotes and led this discussion.
Yeah, I've
And,
learned a lot too. And I'm sure that our ideas on this will continue evolving as we practice
I'm sure we
applying.
didn't even cover everything we've talked about with each other this week. We
That's
might want to
true
do another
too.
episode on this. And
And
we didn't even talk about parenting nearly as much as I would have liked.
That's true. And we might still have to split this into 2 episodes because it's gone pretty long, but it's a good start to this conversation that is increasingly important, I think, as our careers grow and we start to be in positions of leadership more than we ever have before.
And I just think all people, it's increasingly important because the world needs more leaders, because everyone is a leader and everyone is a follower. So yeah, we all need it.
Yeah, we need people who believe in us, and we need to believe in other people. And that can be hard to do. It can be kind of scary.
Awesome. Well, thanks you guys for joining us. We really appreciate your listenership, and we hope you join us on the next episode.
Yep. And if you want a successful career making feature films and a happy family at the same time, visit invisiblemansion.com/film and family to apply for our next enrollment window in the Film and Family Academy, which closes July 1st, 2021. We only accept a select group of qualifying filmmakers each quarter.
If you qualify, you will receive private mentorship in addition to lifetime access to our library of courses. Our alumni are already realizing major career milestones and seeing dramatic transformations in their personal relationships. So if you don't want those results, don't apply.
But if you do, visit invisiblemansion.com/film and family and click apply before July 1st of this year. Thanks so much. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.